Well, we've got a great panel to talk about that. Bo Bertoli, of course, co-founder of Prosper, Ryan Edwards-Pritchard from Cape, Graham Burt from Patron. Your moderator, do we say mediator for this one as well, is the fabulous Jennifer Harrison from Reputation Edge. Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for our next panel.
Thank you, Simon. And thank you for joining us. We're going to put a customer in the spotlight that I know a lot of people have a lot of interest in, which is the small business customer. And I'm joined by Bo Bertoli, who is co-founder and chief revenue officer at Prosper. Hello, Bo.
G'day, how you doing?
Really quickly, could you give people Prosper's elevator pitch?
Yep, sure. So Prosper is Australia and New Zealand's largest online lender to small businesses. We basically build products that help business owners run, grow, and make payments.
Perfect, thank you. Ryan Edwards-Pritchard is founder and CEO of Cape. G'day, Ryan.
Hello, everyone.
Really quickly, what is Cape's elevator pitch?
We're an expense management platform that issues corporate charge cards designed to help you cut wasteful spending and time on financial administration tasks.
And Graham Burt is head of sales at Patron. Welcome, Graham.
Thank you very much,
What's
Jennifer.
Patron's elevator pitch?
So the elevator pitch for Patron, really what we started out life as an approvals engine for payments, and what we're able to do today is actually provide global payments, corporate cards and document management across 33 different currencies.
Thank you. Bo, could you please explain more particularly what is the particular problem that Prosper solves for, and how do you use technology to do that?
Yeah, sure. So at Prosper, we're now 10 years old. We turned 10 in July. So we have the customer core problem that we've been working on for the last decade. And we also have the problems of the future as well that we're working on. So the core problem that we've spent the decade solving is really around access to capital. So how do small business owners get that vital cash to run their business, to take advantage of opportunities, to bridge them through quieter times, as we've seen the last few years, or to really double down and grow. What we're finding over the last really couple of years, though, is that the customer problem space is evolving, and that we want to be moving more and more into a holistic solution for business owners. So not just solving the access to capital piece, but what happens next? When a business owner receives the funding from Prosper, what are they doing with it? Well, they're spending it. They're making spending choices. And how do we help them doing that with the act of that, but also looking at how they manage cash flow in their business? So there's a lot of different problem spaces that covers, and we're happy to go into them in a bit more detail today. But from a high-level perspective, it's how we be that holistic solution under that territory of grow, run, and pay.
And what about the tech that you're using to do that?
Sure. So most of our technology in the early years was built really around things like data aggregation, credit modeling. How do we create seamless and beautiful customer experiences? And that is really carrying us forward. So again, a huge amount of the product and technology investment in our business is how we make decisions. We are a business that takes risk. To put in perspective, we've lent out just under $3 billion in the last 10 years. And over 700 million in the last 12 months. So they're big numbers, and it's very important that we get the accuracy of that right. And we're also always looking at how new forms of technology can help us accelerate our journey. We're sharing some of the earlier startup journeys a bit earlier, and when we got going sort of 10 years ago, we had to build a lot of the foundational components that we use. Today we can partner with many other technology platforms to bring elements of that together to create these beautiful experiences.
And what is it about the competitive landscape that has enabled or permitted Prosper to thrive over the last 10 years? Because most people would think that business lending should be the bank's core business, their core bread and butter. Banks lend, that's how they earn the bulk of their revenue. What is it about the competitive landscape that means Prosper has had this amazing journey over the last 10 years?
Yeah, sure. It's, I mean, the competitive landscape for small businesses in general, I would classify as just an underserviced market. And it's not just in finance and things in and around lending, payments, etc. It's just a holistic problem. They're an underserved part of the economy. So as we got going, and we're 10 years in, but we can still see these gaps in servicing to small businesses. 100% of small businesses have a banking relationship. They have a bank account. They can access terminals and payments and other products. And yet there are dozens, if not hundreds, of fintechs now emerging, some a bit older like us and some in their first early days. So these problem spaces are really big. Just to put the numbers in perspective, just in Australia, there are over 2 million small businesses. That's 97% of all businesses, by the way. And at Prosper, for example, we've got just over 16,000 active customers. So we're not even 1% of the way into this market from our perspective. And a lot of the market sectors that we're talking about are very, very large, with tens, if not hundreds of thousands of underserved customers.
So what is it that you can do that the banks can't do?
I mean, I'd put it down to three things. The banks, I think, are phenomenal at a number of capabilities, and there's really a couple of things that we can do. So the first is focus. At Prosper, for example, and many fintechs out there, you start on one customer problem and you spend a lot of time focusing on that customer problem, and it means we can really double down and try to create great solutions for that problem. That's very hard when you're running a very large enterprise trying to service hundreds of different problems potentially. The second is from a really customer experience perspective. I think that we're able to look at the customer experience problem in that focused lens and dedicate a lot more time and effort to understanding the customer, and we can stick with that problem until we get the right solutions. And the solution we build today is not the solution that's going to be needed in 3 years' time or 5 years after that. So we have to continually evolve that, and I think fintechs can work and move very quickly. And then the third part, I think, is legacy. We are less encumbered by a lot of the legacy technology systems that banks have to run on, and we can again dedicate a lot more resource and focus onto new forms of technology or building new experiences without the legacy that we have to kind of deal with.
Great, thank you. Ryan, tell us more about the problem you're solving for at Cape and how are you using technology to do that?
Sure thing. It's really interesting actually listening to Bo talk about his journey over the last 10 years, both now and just previously. So we're coming at it as one of the, I guess, the spring chickens, the new players kind of in this space. And what Bo was touching on there, this acceleration in terms of disaggregation of financial services. All of a sudden, there's lots of different players in this battlefield with fintechs. And you start thinking about it, and obviously you got the lending space. You then got card providers, card issuers, you got prepaid, you got debit, credit, you got expense management, you got reimbursements, you got corporate travel. What else have we got, Graham?
Oh, thanks for the microphone, yeah. You know what, there are so many areas of payments and being able to pay. It's really, really important for an organisation to be able to take what often looks like spaghetti bolognese, doesn't it, when you're operating a business, and actually try and untangle all of that.
There you go. Just what he said.
Thank you.
So the problem, sorry, go on, Jennifer.
And how are you using technology?
Great question. So the problem that finance teams have is literally dealing with that. And it's a case of what they're looking for is one platform that consolidates all this down. And what we talk about often is the processes, systems, people, elements, and how that has changed drastically over the last 5 to 10 years, especially when you think back in terms of the last couple of years on the people side. Everybody's remote, everybody's hybrid. Have the systems actually adapted to those changes? So for Cape, what we're about is we're actually consolidating everything down onto one simplified platform, smooth workflows, interconnected. What we talk about is looking at those kind of tasks that typically take finance managers a couple of hours to do. How do we take them to be a couple of minutes? And then equally, how do you get a clean view in terms of your actual cash position? How do you ensure that every single dollar you've got in a pocket goes a little bit further? That dollar you've got means $1.50 when it comes to purchasing something. So the way that we look at things is very much as that kind of transaction orchestration layer and actually combining that all together. And the thing that we've realized is it's quite agnostic when you start looking at this from a business perspective. The problems that exist with all these different types of transactions that we just talked about, prior to the transaction being made, are the funds there? Has it been authorized? Is it within budget? During the transaction, in terms of the payment rails is actually going through, is it the most efficient way? To then after the transaction itself, how are you getting it audited? How are you getting it into your general ledger as quickly as possible? So it's about how do you make that whole system as efficient as possible for all those different types of transactions. And that's what we're focused on, and then putting a layer of an intelligence over the top. And the thing that we look at is how do we give our customers all of the power of a finance team without the necessary cost of a headcount increase there? And that's what we're building.
And how do you see the opportunities and challenges in the competitive landscape? And, can you see the banks responding and building their own CAPE-like solution?
100%. I think it'd be naive to think that any one of us has proprietary rights over this space. And the controversial thing that we talked about before is that there's going to be lots of winners within this area. Getting to market is difficult. I've got no doubt, build, buy, partner, as Bo was saying beforehand. On the partners, some might decide to go down that route. Some might decide to build. We saw the prominence in terms of flanker brands coming through. I'm sure we'll see more, pet projects from new CEOs or would-be CEOs coming through in the bank, wanting to show that they can go build something shiny and new. So I've got no doubt that that will continue to be the case, but it's about how quick you can adapt and then also carving out niches. The beautiful thing in terms of the SME space is it's just so diverse. It isn't a one-size-fits-all approach.
And is that the diversity of small businesses is a great point, because if you think of the different needs of a plumber versus a coffee shop versus a suburban tax accountant versus a hairdresser, these are all small businesses, but they all have very, very different needs. Is that an opportunity or a challenge or a double-edged sword?
It's definitely a challenge. And I think for any startup, the hardest thing is when you're actually getting up and running is being disciplined in terms of focusing on which customer problems you're actually trying to solve. You just can't solve it all. And each one of them has got so many different issues that they come with, and then it's prioritizing them. The most fascinating thing that I find when we look at the business banking space, even right now, it is an oligopoly. It's owned, Big Four own 90% of that market. There is a huge opportunity there. They can't service all those customers. Is there another industry out there? And I'd love anybody to say here that where there is an oligopoly where they'll actually turn away customers so that Prosper can go and help them. No, there isn't. So that's the opportunity there, but it's about how do you work with the banks, how do you partner, and I think that's the kind of opportunity in this industry.
Great, thank you. Graham, Patron, what's the problem you're solving for and how are you using technology to do that?
Okay, and look, it's a really good question. The problem that we see with the customer, the small and medium businesses in our marketplace and most marketplaces around the globe really do have a problem in how they get payments to people. How do they collect the right documentations? How do you pay the right amount of money? How do you control spend? And how do you actually affect all of that happening in a cost-effective and also speedy way? People want to get paid quickly. We need to make sure that we do a better job of making those payments. Now, the way that we go about doing that is we partner with a lot of the banks. We partner with many other fintechs. In fact, I can see some of them even here in the room with us today. And we actually pull together all of that capability to provide a customer front end that will allow them to be able to untangle all of that payment complexity underneath. And I think that's the real power of it is how do we make it simpler for SMBs, for customers to actually affect all of that in their businesses. And I don't think it's a matter of saying it's solving a banking problem or a technology problem. Patron as an organisation really does encapsulate both the fin and the tech part of being a fintech.
Great. Open question. What, other than the banks responding, what about, Amazon or Block, formerly Square? What about some of these overseas players or big tech players? How do you see them in the competitive mix?
From my perspective, I think there is going to be a lot of competition. Ryan, you mentioned it as well, right? Which is, this is a really emerging market. There is going to be lots of organisations, fintechs, banks, other technology providers who are actually going to look at trying to solve these problems. And I think where I see the differentiation, and it's great to be on stage with Bo and with Ryan because I think they've got a very similar mindset, which is customer first. If you put the customer at the centre of everything that you do, that will actually change the way that the technology and the way that you address that problem actually evolves. And so, I think others will get involved in that. It'll become aggregated, it'll become intermediated in different ways. But again, provided you keep the customer at the centre, I think that addresses the major issue.
Yeah, to build onto that point, we've seen the emergence in terms of embedded finance, embedded banking, frictionless services, and we know that that's just a path that we're now on. I think the most interesting thing that I look at, and I'm sure a lot of, I haven't been here for all events yesterday and today, but I'm sure there's been plenty of talk around Web3, and what does that mean? It's a new landscape. And for me, some of the things that I'm most excited about are probably more so less the NFTs, not to shame anybody else out there who's an NFT lover, but the DeFi side. I think it's an opportunity to just reimagine, reinvent the financial services landscape with something more efficient, borderless, 24/7. And I think just the cost of capital in terms of bringing that down, I don't think you're ever going to be able to compete with a bank, but I think for fintechs coming into the space, it's a fascinating space. So for me, that is a huge opportunity. It's not somewhere, because the biggest problem that we see within banking, whether it's consumers or commercial, is inertia, in terms of you're more likely to get a divorce than you are to break up with your bank. So that is unfortunately an issue. Whereas Web3, this side here, it is a new land grab. It's a new opportunity. So that for me is a fascinating space right now. And then putting that aside, more specifically on the payments world, if you look in terms of the fact of MasterCard and Visa, obviously we've seen digital payment providers come in terms of Stripe and Adyen and a few others over the last couple of years who have been the real winners in this space. But I think just looking at what's the promise and opportunity with open banking, CDR, not necessarily in the next 12 months, but the next 10 years, and looking at account-to-account authentication, payments, initiation, that for me is a real big opportunity, especially when we're making more and more online payments and moving from offline. So there's plenty of opportunity, and new technologies kind of giving everybody a chance to build something in there.
I mean, just a final thing, all great points as well. One slightly different lens perhaps on the big tech approach is that big tech have got their eye on financial services, and we've watched them over the last really decade creep their way into it. And look at Apple Pay, for example, a great example of a product that was launched 8 years ago. Apple have not been in a rush. They've just been taking their time. They've got hundreds of billions in cash. They're fine. They've got a lot of time to get it right. And if it takes them 25 years, they're happy with that. I think the capital market shift over the last 6 to 12 months is creating not so much competition, but more pressure on startups and scale-ups to figure out how do you actually monetize the problem that you're solving, and how do you do that in a way before you kind of run out of money. And I think that's a big shift in mindset for founders in particular, because 12 months ago, there was a lot more capital available, which bought you a lot more time to solve these problems. So whilst there's competition from the one end of town, where they've got a lot of time and a lot of money to take their time, there's a different form of pressure that's building up inside fintech. So I think it's really important for founders to be thinking a lot more about monetization of their products than perhaps it was even 6 to 12 months ago.
Awesome. So, Bo, what's coming up on Prosper's roadmap?
So for us, the big moves are in the capital side. We are still building out, 10 years later, that customer proposition. So one thing I've learned about product is it's never done. There's always a way to enhance it. So our core original products, we're still making and building better versions of them, still trying to get that access to capital faster and more seamless and more flexible. So our loan products and our line of credit revolving products are all continuing to get enhanced. But the big move for us in this last 12 months has been the design and build and now release in the last 2 weeks of our all-in-one business account. And that's bringing together effectively a transaction account with payments capability. Right around the corner, we're going to link our credit into that, and we're going to start overlaying a whole bunch of other services into that product. So things like the ability to make payments, integrate with a whole range of different platforms where payments start. We're going to be looking at FX and a whole different array of ways that business owners are actually running their businesses. And again, that's going to be a product category for us that over the next probably 10 years, we're going to just continue to invest in and continually build out that proposition.
Great. And Ryan, what's coming up for Cape on the product roadmap?
Great question. We're obviously on very much the earlier side to Bo, so we're challenged with what Bo just put it there. We've only just started onboarding customers last quarter, so really for us it's about going to market and moving from where we are closed beta into open beta and public launch later in the year. The thing that we talk about, myself and my colleague over there, Ben, is building complete expense nirvana, as our mission. So this 12
Did you say expense nirvana?
Believe it or not, tearing your hair out in terms of those receipts, those bloody expense reports, that shoebox full of them, wherever they are, or the glove box you got. It's about how do we rid people of that pain. So we're trying to narrow down the focus and just go, right, how do we solve this problem? Because it's a real issue for a lot of people, and especially for the finance team in the end of the month. So we're very much just focused on that right now. Fix that, move on to the next piece. So we'll move from expense nirvana is stage 1, and then payments nirvana stage 2, and then everything else for year 3. Let's see.
Okay. And Graham, Patron is barely 2 years old, and you've achieved so much. So again, to you, what's on your product roadmap?
So Jennifer, yeah, and you're right. I mean, it's incredible to think we've only been around 2 years and we've signed up a lot of customers. And it was interesting. Our initial thought was not to go down the corporate cards track, and we actually did that in response to the customer asking for it. So I want to go back to, we are very customer driven in terms of what we look at doing. We've got some really exciting initiatives that we have launched already and we're already well underway with, in terms of making sure we build very deep integration into the ERP systems to really bring that technology side into the fin side, so that we can actually make that payments process so much smoother. And I think the other piece out of all of this is this ability to be able to make sure you manage all of the documents that become part of the life of every business, and manage that in the most efficient and scalable manner. And so we're moving down those tracks.
Fantastic. I think now, do we have some time for some questions for the audience? Does anyone have a question for the panel?
Excellent.
Hi there. Hi, Ryan. So you've joined us over from the UK, so I'm just really interested to see, like, what have you seen as the differences between, like, the Australian market and the UK market from what you saw from a business banking perspective?
Oof.
That's a big question.
Great question. Funnily enough, we were talking about this, it just beforehand, and it sounds like you're from the UK as well. Yep. So good to meet you. The differences in terms of the two, I think you can date back to the GFC and the impact that had. And we were talking about this in terms of just it being this catalyst in terms of all of these new propositions coming into existence. And it was an incredible time looking back 10 years ago. All of a sudden the banks came out of the market. The first wave of fintech lenders, Funding Circle, iWalker, these kind of guys coming through. And really kind of being at the epicenter in terms of, we'd like to think the epicenter in terms of Europe. Obviously that has changed. But there's still the thing is, all the talent going into London for the last 10 years, all the VC dollars, and it's actually put startups and scale-ups onto hyperdrive. So it's a very saturated market. It's very hard now to actually go and get enough market share there. So incredibly competitive. I'd say in terms of Australia, competitive. I think we talked about the oligopoly kind of nature. I think the Competition Markets Authority in the UK, who kind of regulate the kind of big 9 banks, have done a pretty good job in terms of opening them up. I think in terms of Australia, we're still at the earlier stages of that. There is still a large amount of market share with them, which presents a great opportunity for new fintechs coming through. So very different in terms of, feels like right now, but a great opportunity for fintechs coming into this market, not as saturated as how I feel, but it's very competitive still.